in English. Um, Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start by thanking PwC for the opportunity, Carlos, and it's been we go back quite a long time. Our relationship, the foundation and PwC. I'm glad to host this event. Catherine, thank you so much for making the time to be here with us today. I'll be brief. Everybody has a short bio of yours on this leaflet. Catherine has been working on corporate governance for almost 20 years. She is now member of Governance Insights Center in PwC, located in New Jersey. As high qualified people entirely dedicated to think about and to guide companies in the realm of corporate governance. And she would have many topics to address, but she was generous and flexible enough to accept my suggestion. And she will be addressing the topic of cybersecurity. Although, as she told me, she's not exactly an expert on that. But I think she is in a position to give us information and share knowledge on this issue from a very interesting standpoint, which is how to make executives, CEOs, and boards in particular, how to make them understand what are the risks involved in managing cybersecurity. And so it is from this standpoint that Catherine will address us today. So I'll stop here. Catherine, you told me you would talk for about 15 minutes. Then we will start a very informal conversation here. I would ask everyone who was interested in making questions or comments that you stand up and speak on the mic, because we are being recorded and actually we are live on our Facebook page. So Catherine, once again, thank you so much for being here with us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm also going to speak in English, in part because I have about 5 words of Portuguese and I generally mispronounce them all the time, so I am sorry. I will try to not use sort of acronyms or heavily technical terms, but sometimes when you're talking about IT and cybersecurity, it's a little difficult. I guess, I want to sort of set the stage, and as was said, I deal with boards of directors mostly in senior management teams, and boards have a real concern over cybersecurity. But before we even get to why it's so tough for boards to oversee cybersecurity and even things like data privacy, I just wanted to share a few data points with you. We do at PwC globally an annual CEO survey, and we ask CEOs a number of questions. And just as an example, in 2017, so earlier this year, CEOs from around the world, 70% of them said that they had concerns about the rapid pace of technological change. So the people who are heading global companies are looking around and thinking things are changing really rapidly, and it's just hard to keep up, and it's hard to feel good about how we as a company are addressing them. A few years ago, we actually asked them, do you think that technology will transform your business in the next 5 years? And 86% said yes. And if you even look particularly even at something as simple as the retail environment, at least in the United States with online retailers, That has really transformed not only other retail stores that people used to walk into, bookstores and record stores, but even it's transforming malls and shopping centers, because suddenly people don't go there to buy anymore. They might go there and look, but then they go online and see where they can get it most inexpensively. So what we think about when we think about IT and technology is that it's not a technology issue, it really is a business issue. And so we have a basic belief that more and more boards as a whole should be getting involved in overseeing technology, both the risk side, but also how it's being used strategically. So why is this such sort of a challenging area? And I think it's a few things, and I'm not sure if these issues have necessarily, or these developments necessarily, made as big a splash down in Brazil as they did in the United States. But just over a week or so ago, we saw the huge data breach at Equifax in the United States. I think, per the newspaper reports, because I know nothing other than what I've read in the newspapers, they're estimating 140 million people have had everything you need to steal my identity is now somewhere out there. Social security numbers, driver's licenses, addresses, and all kinds of very detailed information. And so directors look at that and think, If you remember back earlier this year, there were the ransomware attacks in the UK, where whoever it was went in and in essence shut down hospital systems and other, I think, government systems in England, and said, if you want access to your systems, you have to pay us like a ransom. And so directors are seeing that. And then even just last week in the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, which is the chief regulator for all public companies, they announced that they themselves had been subject to a cyber attack. And someone had gone in for a period of time and stolen some of their data. And when you think about that, companies actually file financial statements with the SEC, and between the time they maybe push the button to the SEC and the time the SEC posts it, that's really valuable information, because it's what are our earnings. And they don't even, the SEC, I believe, has said they don't even know just whether it was used for insider trading or how it might be used. I think the bottom line is, when directors and management members look at the news, it's like almost never good on the technology side. Either there's information being lost, or your business, unless you are a disruptor, your business is being disrupted, and it's really challenging your strategy. So that just sounds like a really dire picture, and I feel like I'm bringing everyone down here. So let me tell you then also why we see it so difficult for boards of directors. And some of the statistics I'm going to share are really what boards of directors are thinking in the United States, or are. For one thing, there are very few technology experts on U.S. public company boards. I've seen estimates that go fairly low, but there aren't really a lot of people who are have deep expertise on U.S. boards. Another factor is that if we look at the boards of the S&P 500 companies, and this information is based on something that Spencer Stuart, which is a major executive and board search firm, does a study every year on the S&P 500. The average age is 63, and a lot of directors are sort of retired and have, maybe aren't actively employed anymore. And so if you take, on the one hand, the impact of social media and apps and mobile computing and everything, the way that millennials are changing the way they do everything, and then you compare what's happening in all that innovation and disruption to the people who generally sit around a board table, there's a huge disconnect. So the board directors tend not to be living the technology and the advances the same way their, not even children, but probably grandchildren are living it. And so I think that really leads to many directors feeling sort of vulnerable. They know it's an issue, they know they're not current, and they don't really know the questions to ask. And if they did know the questions to ask, I'm not sure that they would really know if the answers made sense. Probably the fourth element I'll share and is that, and I'm going to say this, and I know I'm going to offend some people, but the fact that sometimes when your chief information officer is reporting to the board or your chief information security officer is reporting, they use a lot of technical language and they're not particularly understandable and they talk in acronyms. And at the end of the day, directors will often look at them and think, oh, goodness gracious, I just don't understand that. I don't even know if how I should feel about anything. And so I think it's just a really difficult issue. Just trying to look. So every year, so maybe the question is, if you're on a board or if you report to a board level, how do you deal with this? And we're seeing a few things happening. In the United States, we do an annual corporate director survey every year, and we typically hear from between 800 and 900 public company directors. And we've got some interesting information. So we don't ask the same questions every year, but back in 2015, we were trying to understand how often the board met with the chief information officer, and 25% said that they met with the CIO at every formal board meeting, and another 34% said they met with the CIO at least twice a year. So what we are seeing is at least the CIO meeting with boards on fairly regular basis. But we also asked, where do you oversee IT-related risks, information technology-related risks at your board? And only about 27% of them said it was at the full board level. And instead, just over half said that they give those IT risks including cybersecurity, to the audit committee. And I don't know if many people here sort of interact with the audit committee, but audit committees are, trust me, already really overloaded. And so you take a really complex issue like cybersecurity risk and IT risk and also give it to the audit committee, and it's just maybe not the ideal place to go. Plus, you know, as we sort of said earlier, if you think about IT, it really is a business issue and not just a technology issue because it has an impact on your strategy and disruption. The one other statistic I'll share is the fact that we asked last year directors if they actually hire their own consultants other than the consultants that management hires to help them or to advise on IT. And 1/3 of boards, and I even find that a little high, but 1/3 of the directors said that their board itself had hired a third party to help advise the board on IT. So I think directors may be looking around the table thinking that we really don't know, and so they are showing that they're much more willing to go out and hire consultants. I guess, you know, the other elements that maybe I will share, because these are what we tend to share or advise boards to think about, and then I want to move on to privacy, and then we can open it up for some other dialogue, is, you know, it's the fact that all companies and maybe all organizations, not just companies, are really under attack all the time. And it's a little frightening to think of. You sort of want to go and hide your money under your bed or something like that. But I just remember a few years ago meeting with an entire board of a company in New York. They were a real estate company. So, and they were not a big name company at all. They were public. And we were talking about cybersecurity, and they had just had their chief information security officer in to do a presentation to the board. And this company that, if you paid me $1 million, I wouldn't even be able to remember its name. It is subject to attack thousands and tens of thousands of times every day from people trying to get into their systems of an absolutely non-brand name company. And I think that just shows just how much attacking is going on. So part of the challenge that directors get to is, what kind of information do you want to get on cybersecurity in terms of the attack levels, but also in terms of what management is doing around protecting the assets. And we talk about the fact that there's all kinds of information in every company, but I think the view, and I think we have some more technology experts in the room who can correct me if I'm wrong, but the view is you can't really put huge fences around absolutely everything in a company. You have to really be a little more specific and figure out what is the really most important and valuable information, and that's the information that you really ring fence and put multiple layers of security around, with the understanding that people are going to get into your system some way, but at least you hopefully are protecting the really most important stuff. Another thing, we advise directors to think about is to ask about things like your deferred maintenance and what percentage of known security fixes that that the company has been informed that it should fix are still outstanding, and what the time is. Because often we see when there are cyber attacks that what they've gone after are sort of these really known glitches that the companies just haven't fixed. So we sort of refer to that as the deferred maintenance on the security system. But that gets, it just gets into some real challenges. We were talking before the session started, and when you think about the fact that your chief information officer has a limited pot of money, it's in many ways way easier to try and spend that pot of money to get shiny new printers and new laptops and things that are going to make your users happy. It's a lot less appealing and less sort of sexy to spend that money in the nitty gritty nuts and bolts of your system, making the changes and fixes. The one other thing I'll share maybe before moving on to the topic of privacy is the fact that, again, cyber attacks are really frightening, and one of the things that doesn't give anyone a great sense is the fact that often when they come to light, whoever might have been in your system for months before the company figured it out. And even what we see in the United States is the fact that sometimes the company's not figuring it out. It's the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that's calling the company and saying, by the way, did you know that Russian hackers or other bad actors, have been attacking your systems and are inside? So that's never a good call to get. What we also recommend then is that companies really need to have a cyber attack crisis plan in place. You need to know who to call. You need to have your team ready, because it's really not a question of if, it's a question of when. And you want to do as much advance work as you can to be prepared when it does hit. And the advanced work is a number of different things. So it's not just your technology experts, but it's dealing with your communications people. What's the company going to say on social media, and how's the company going to advise the press? what do you need to do to advise your regulators? Because at least in the United States, there is a lot of pressure on putting out information, like even to the SEC, because the view is if there's a really bad cyber breach, that may impact your share price and things like that. And then, at least in the United States, I think almost every different state has different rules for the length of time before you have to notify people. So say your employees' information was stolen, you have to, once you figure that out, have to notify them, or your customer information, or your client information, or patient information if you're a hospital. So there are a lot of reasons to have really good advice from your inside and external law firm, communications people, as well as your IT people. And it always, or it can be really helpful to have some really good connections already with the police, Interpol or the FBI. There are another sort of whole set of issues there, but I have heard of some American companies at the board level asking sort of their local or regional FBI directors who specialize in cybersecurity, either for their region or for their industry, to come into the board and actually share what they're seeing, what the nature of the attacks is, and sort of how to connect themselves. Because there are many players that are going to have to get involved if something really does go wrong with your company, and having those relationships beforehand can be really helpful. So let me move a little to data privacy. And there's so much focus on cybersecurity that often, or a little too much, we think boards aren't necessarily paying enough attention to the privacy side of the house. And it gets to questions that are very basic, like what information are we collecting on our employees, on our customers, on our clients? And almost a more fundamental question is, do we really need all of that information? And that's a really sort of, I think, challenging question to answer, because in these days of big data where, especially for customer or consumer facing companies, the more we can get about how often you walk your dog and where your child goes to school, and I'm making stuff up here, but the more information we can get about everything you do and which gas station you go to and where you buy your water, the more we can maybe target what we want, or target ad campaigns to you and things like that. But the real challenge is, do you really need it all? Because, particularly for highly personal information, if you're going to collect it, there is going to be the expectation that you're going to protect it. And so, the question I think becomes, do we even as a company know what we're collecting? And I'll give you an example. We were having a sort of privacy / cybersecurity discussion a few years ago at a director event. And I was talking with the director of a biotech company because there were new rules that came out, I think a few years ago, around taking credit card information. So like a higher need to protect credit card information that was being taken. And the directors of this biotech company thought, oh, that doesn't apply to us. We're not in the consumer business. We don't take that. And then I think someone finally asked the question, and it turns out they did take credit cards because, and I don't know how your health system here is in Brazil, but in the United States, when you go for treatment, you often have to copay or pay a portion. Maybe it's $20 or $50. And so they were using their patients' credit cards for the copays. Directors, wouldn't have even thought that they had credit card information that they then had to protect. So, the other, I guess, one or two other things. The other question, and not just for board directors, but even for executives, is to try and be more front-ended and start thinking for the new services or the new kind of products we are building, what are the privacy implications, and how do we sort of build them in or get them considered right from the start? So it's one thing with everything we've already been doing, but going forward, again, maybe it's a little more of a testing of what kind of information do we even have to gather. And that becomes almost even more relevant when you think of the Internet of Things and the fact that there are so many things now, from, I guess, pacemakers to the thermostat in your house that's connected to the Internet, and people can not only access things remotely, but also open it up to having things accessed by other people remotely or by the company that sold you the product. You know, if you even just look at electric cars, software upgrades get pushed down from the cloud to individual cars. And so there are a lot of questions, I think, as companies redevelop and try and make everything, you know, refrigerators, mine isn't, but refrigerators are internet enabled now. And I don't know if they've hit the Brazilian market, but I've seen pictures where you can be in your grocery store buying groceries and then turn on the camera to look inside your refrigerator to figure out if you need more milk or eggs or things like that. So that's really cool, except when you got someone else turning on the cameras in your house. So maybe I'm just a little risk averse. The one other thing I will say is that there is a great deal of new legislation on the privacy front. There are pretty strict rules in places like China that are just being put into effect. But in particular, one that's attracting a lot of attention is the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union. And it is setting very strict new rules around protecting data for any multinationals that operate in the EU. So it doesn't matter if you're a Brazilian company, if you have operations over in Europe anywhere, you are caught by the EU rules. Not only are there sort of a number of requirements, but if you don't protect data, there can be some pretty significant fines. And I think that's the way we're sort of seeing many companies around the world move, which is to begin to make the fines for either cybersecurity breaches or other breaches of privacy, make them far more impactful. So with that, I think I will pause and open it up to discussion. Hand the mic back to you.
Thank you. More than enough food for thoughts and for questions. Who wants to start? If nobody wants, I can use my prerogative. Ladies first. Would you? Yeah, and you need a mic. I would suggest everyone introduce her himself very, very quickly before making the question.
Hi, okay. Hello, congratulations for your speech. I'm Amanda. I'm working at Tecnovahead. It is a security company here that we work with big groups like Checkpoint and others that it's famous all over the world. And I've got a point and a question. Last year, I saw numbers, and I saw that Brazil is ranked second in the world for online banking, frauds, and financial malware also. And this year, I was in Gartner Summit also, and I saw a lot of speeches that when I realized that this doesn't make a lot of sense for here in Brazil. Let me try to explain that. some particular things that they thought about Brazil, I think it's a little bit different from in the reality. In your opinion, do you think that it is difficult in maturity? It's social engineering, or it's a management problem here that we got in Brazil? I think it's a little bit difficult to answer. I think it's a mix of everything. But what do you think it's the key point that we have more difficult here in Brazil? Maturity, management, or social engineering?
I quite honestly don't have enough depth of understanding of Brazil to even begin to guess what the issue is. I will say, maturity or not of companies and systems, everyone in the world seems to be being pulled along between social media and mobile computing. And I think wherever you are, even if you're not as mature, you're going to be pulled along, and you sort of better mature quickly, because I just think it's a tough situation. Does anyone else have any other perspectives on that? Yeah.
Would like to share.
Hi, I'm Mariana Ortiz. I work for Generali Assicurazioni, an international group for insurance. Basically, my job is to develop cyber insurance. I did this for 3 years in another insurance company, and then I'm starting up this in Brazil. So the reason why I wanted to comment your question is that I have the same questions as you, but I have some conclusions as well. And I think that the problem here is a mix of everything, but this is not attached only to Brazil. For me, this is a problem inherent to Latin America in general. I worked with other countries than Brazil before working Generali, and the problem we have with this part of the world is that we need to see things happening then to find better solutions for these problems. Insurance is one of them. In the ecosystem of the cyber protection, insurance is one of the keys. And the resistance we found in places below Mexico, I mean with Argentina, Chile, and Brazil, it was very big. We visit basically daily directors and officers from the biggest companies in Brazil and some of the world as well, some of them European-based. And we tell them that the possibility is of attack is almost 99%. And 99% of the facts of the attacks are human as well. So you cannot avoid this, and they don't listen to us. We tell them that this can impact in their reliability for, as directors and officers. They have insurance for this as well, and they do not care because they think they're going to be covered under the D&O insurance policy as well. So what I think is the problem of the maturity of the country that thinks that this is something, the cyber attacks are still things from the movies. They underestimate the possibility of a cyber attack. We have the millennials coming, so I think that this reality is gonna come like faster, but they're not still in the power of decision. So that's why one of the reasons I think this is going slowly. And I think there is a big problem as well with the IT teams. I don't know who is part of the IT teams here, but my personal experience with the IT teams, and it's totally comprehensive, is that if a CIO comes to a CEO or a CFO and says, well, you invest all your money in IT systems, you invest a lot in security and trainings, compliance trainings, but we're still under attack, maybe they can put their jobs in jeopardy. So that's why I think that they still have some resistance. So as I said, it's not only about security systems, they have to keep inviting, and but from my side, I would put the insurance as a key protection. The insurance offers all these solutions that you said about going to the company, checking what are the damages, and working the business interruption. That is also a loss that we can have besides the data that you can lose. They do not get the importance of it. They still think, oh, okay, the systems I have, they're enough, and maybe it's because of their jobs they want to protect. I don't know.
Interesting remark. Go ahead. The millennials first.
Sorry about that.
Well, I'm not here.
Thank you for the millennium. Anyway, I'm Mauricio from Protivity Global Consulting. So I saw your this discussion, and I think part of what you did, I thought about a lot about that. And I think that the problem that we have, you're right, I think the Latin Americans, we have an issue, and this is a question also for you, is how big the regulation is for a good security, cybersecurity or data privacy issue, because here we don't have any regulation in fact. So it's very hard to prosecute someone, it's very hard to prosecute a company. We Brazil, or Latin Americans, we don't care because we don't have means of protecting our assets that are in the hands of corporations. So what do you feel? Because my answer for these questions is, I think 50% regulations. We don't have regulations here. So I'd like to know from you if you think that in the US is regulate, or now Europe, as you said, GDPR and so forth, if the regulation is a relevant part of what drives enterprises to adopt this.
I do think regulation and enforcement, so it's not just the regulation, but it's the enforcement, and are two things that are obviously key. But the other element is really the reputation risk. And so I think that's where companies are looking around the table. And, you know, there were some major retailers in the United States a few years ago who a big data breach came to light right before sort of the holiday shopping season, and that had an impact. So, you know, in part it is regulation, it's fines and enforcement, but another big part of it is the media and customers figuring out where they were going to, especially end user customers like you and I around the table making our buying decisions, where we're going to buy from. It's, you know, and even all the regulation in the world and even all the best efforts, I believe, from companies around the world, we're never going to solve this problem, right?
Catherine, thanks. I changed the subject a little bit. If I understood you correct, I'm George from an ex-PwC partner. I just retired about a year ago. But if I understood you correctly, you said in your speech about companies having some sort of connections, and I think it's connection, exchange informations with police and institute. Can you explain a little bit more of that?
Sure.
Elaborate on that.
Sure. And it's interesting, I'm smiling as you ask that, because that is an issue that there are many different views on. If you talk with the police, like the FBI agents or the Interpol agents, what they will say is, as soon as you think that there may be a breach, please reach out to us, because we have the ability to investigate. We have other resources we can draw on. And I remember hearing one former FBI agent speak, and he was saying, you know, the reality is if you are a bank and someone goes in and robs your bank of money, someone goes in and sticks it up, you don't wait a week or two to call the police. And he said the thing with data breaches, though, is that people wait, and there's a real sort of concern. And the longer after you figure out that a breach has been made, I think, not a technical person, but I think it's more difficult to sort of chase down.
Equifax waited for a month. There you go.
I will not comment on specific companies. That said, it is also interesting, because if you remember, I said earlier that one of the things we see is often it will be, like in the United States, the FBI calling the company and saying, by the way, do you know that other people are in your system? Where there's more tension is that there are all kinds of reporting requirements by the SEC for public companies and to, as I said, inform like individual employees or customers. But sometimes the FBI will actually go in and say, you know, we would like you not to do anything about it and not to announce it because we want to watch their movement in your system and try and figure out where they are. So you really have these two very opposing pieces of legislation or guidance that are telling you to do two absolutely opposite things. The other thing that apparently often the law enforcement will do is they will want full access to a company's systems. And that's another issue. Yes, I'll stop right there.
Thank you.
Who else?
Hi there, good evening. My name is Fabricio Mercier. I work at Amerigo. We are a distributor of technology, mainly coming from Europe. My question is regarding Patriot Act. In 2014, so DIRMA was hacked by the NSA, and this actually pushed people to look at the obligations of technology providers, mainly coming from the US. Patriot Act, pretty much from what I understand, is if you're an American technology provider or you do have majority of American capital into your technology firm, you have to comply with the Patriot Act, effectively giving access to the NSA to any information that goes into your systems. So I wanted to know how you think Brazilian firms should look at it in terms of effectively, given that we don't have any local provider of security, especially with the new technology like SOC, how would you actually advise company to deal with this risk?
This is going to be another question that if anyone knows American football, I'm going to punt to someone else. Does anyone from Brazil have a perspective on that? Because I don't know enough about the Patriot Act or the specific requirements, but does anyone else have a view on that?
I remember some time ago dealing with technology, globally speaking, in a function that I had, that it was always a concern for us down here, dealing with the US and Patriot Act, basically, because there is some sort of a sovereignty and constitutional discussions and issues. So it's not an easy subject for, I guess, for at least for South American countries, I would say, because I remember I had South American responsibility at the time to deal with. So there is always some concerns on how to connect on those things because of the U.S. Patriot Act regulations, as you said. But that's where we are.
Hi, Catherine. First of all, thanks a lot for your speech. It was really delighting. I'm from IBM. I'm from marketing communications. And one thing that you have mentioned was about the board on 500 Fortune. The average is 63 years old. How they are managing the culture, because I guess one of the leaks in every cybersecurity or data privacy leak is about the culture, right? The culture to protect the data, the culture of avoiding risk. So how have you been experiencing things related to changing culture in the boards and in the companies?
On the board, it's, I think, a little more difficult to change culture. You know, I said before that there's very little IT-related expertise generally on boards, particularly sort of cybersecurity expertise. We are seeing a little of that change. So, for example, there have been a number of boards who've added U.S. military people to their boards, particularly U.S. military people who had focused on cybersecurity or protecting information systems as part of their careers. The other thing we're seeing that changes, and it's not so much a cybersecurity issue, but it's the fact that we are seeing a handful of much younger social media CEOs joining boards. So there have been a few sort of brand name consumer products companies that have like 27, 28-year-old people who've created applications that we would all know on their boards, just to try and bring a different perspective. That's often, the companies that are doing that are often doing that not from a protection perspective, but more from a how do we use what these young people know to help our strategy and to help sort of push us to be more of a disruptor instead of to be disrupted. There really hasn't been a lot of change, and I am sorry, I have just forgotten the second half of your question. It was there a minute ago till I started speaking. What was the other part?
I was talking about to change the culture regarding data security and data privacy, because it relies on not only on IT but also on person, how you behave. So what you are doing to change behaviors on inside their companies?
Yeah. That's really, really a challenge. And I think someone mentioned earlier that one of the big challenges in the company are your insiders, are your employees. And even if your employees have the best meaning in the world, so they're not out to get the company or hurt the company, they may inadvertently click on a link and introduce some bad virus into the system, or just inadvertently, at least in the U.S. I've heard various statistics, including that the biggest threat that companies have are their own employees, and it can be absolutely. I'll tell you a few stories maybe. It can be absolutely well-meaning. So just for example, you may get a call, or an employee in, say, the accounts payable gets a call saying, I'm a senior salesperson and our major customer or our major supplier is so annoyed they haven't gotten their check yet. Can you just cut the check? And everything looks legitimate, and really they're trying to scam you. Or, I've also heard of situations where on some social media or social networking sites, people will, even from a business perspective, look like they're having an ongoing conversation with someone they've never met. And then someone will say, well, if I send you my resume, can you take a look at it and provide me with comments? And then the second you click on it, there's something bad in there. So where I've seen is not so much culture, but more around education. So a few things. One is really trying to protect people from themselves. So again, it comes back to almost the basic security hygiene of you should really only have access to the stuff you need to do your immediate job. But then another part is education. And whether it's education of employees, especially the ones who have access to the checkbook, that if something just seems a little wrong, don't do it. So just as an example, there will be emails that will come through spoofing, looking like they're from the CEO, saying, gotta pay this now, just cut the check, and don't even ask me about it, we gotta do it. And I know I was talking with one board and sort of sharing this kind of story, and they said, yes, the thing that saved us was that, say the CEO's name was Robert, but he only ever went by Bob, and he signed this email Robert. But everything else, you would think it was the CEO requiring it. So it's a lot of training. And I will tell you, even at PwC, we do, at least in the United States, we do these things where you'll get an email saying, there is a package for you in the mailroom, sort of click on here to find out. And if you click, they will send you a very nice, by the way, that was a phishing, attempt to fish. You really should not be clicking on things like that. And so they will do that occasionally. And I probably miss emails now, but if I don't recognize who it's from, it just goes out. So it's a lot of it is employee awareness. So it's partly culture, but a lot more almost training, protecting them from themselves, but also training. Does anyone else have any ideas on how they've seen culture shifted, or employees trained well in this area?
I was wondering whether there are statistics regarding who are the hackers. Are they governments, non-state actors, individuals, you name it? Do you know who they are? I mean, statistically speaking, you.
I'm not sure statistically speaking, but the answer is they are all of the above. And I put, which doesn't make anyone feel any better. I put together a few slides, and we can definitely distribute them to the people who are here afterwards. But excuse me.
You're this tiny for
Yeah, I know.
cybersecurity reasons? Or?
That's right. But in essence, there are probably 5 key areas. There are the nation states. So that's really the countries that are trying to get some economic or political advantage. And, you know, we've seen nation state attacks in many ways. There are the terrorists, organized crime and criminals, the hacktivists, and those are the people particularly who are doing things like denial of service attacks. We saw that a lot even a few years ago on banks, denial of service, because at one point, I believe it was the banks stopped processing credit card payments for WikiLeaks, and so there was a huge attack on a number of banks. And then the insiders, as we talked about, who can disrupt. They all have different motives. They all have different things they're maybe targeting and potentially different impacts. But what they want sort of at the end of the day is to do something with your data that you do not want them to do. But I'm really glad you asked, because in part you look at this, and one of the good questions that the senior management team should be having, if not the board of directors, is where do we think our biggest risks are? Who is most likely to target us? And how are we trying to prevent against that? And some of that will just go to what kind of information do we have? So, for example, if we've got a lot of credit card information, then particularly organized crime, as they're trying to steal IDs. And the big, one of the big things that I found was interesting, there's this whole like dark web that operates that most of us never see. One of our partners, who's a former FBI agent, he said that on the dark web, what's even more valuable in the United States than credit card information is health insurance information. And so people are using health insurance from other people to go in and get services. There's a whole, yeah. I think we'll all be hiding under our beds tonight. But.
Can I? Well, another question is whether you have reliable information on whether the number of cybersecurity of cyber attacks are growing arithmetically or exponentially. I mean, what are the trends? I mean.
Do you know that from your work with? Okay, maybe we can pass the mic.
All right.
Okay. So you mean the trends? I mean, in terms of attacks or in terms of a type of business?
No, the number, the sheer number. Are they growing?
Yeah, they are going faster. So just for you to know, in 2016, the profit of these criminal organizations was the size of an apple. It was $4.5 billion in crimes. It was free profit, 100% for them, taxes free. We are expecting for 2020, where the boom of IoT is going to happen. We are waiting for some losses.
The boom of what?
The Internet of Things.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So
Acronyms.
yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So we are reading for 2020 is expected to be the boom of the Internet of Things. We are expecting losses around trillions of dollars.
And what about the trends regarding the capital investment in cybersecurity? You're keeping pace with this?
Yeah, this is a mystery. This is like a million dollars question because these changes they can come faster or not. And why that? Because the companies are investing and they are putting more efforts in cybersecurity. As long as they see disasters like we had in London this year, or like Home Depot these days, we had another again since Home Depot or Whole Foods, one of them. Yeah. Oh, Target. It was Target. Sorry, Target had again. So they need to see, they need to materialize it to invest in things. The sensation I have is that people do not give the right value to data as they should. One emblematic case we had was the Ashley Madison, and why it was so noisy? Because it was involving not only personal data, but you're exposing people that they were cheating their wives and their husbands. You know, people killed themselves because of that. It was like a nightmare. I think this is one of the first biggest realities we got in terms of cyber attack. For the future, what we see is that in terms of investments, the softwares they have to improve, so the companies have to work hard on this. Therefore, I believe that the companies are going to buy. In terms of insurance, what the companies are doing now is selling insurance for big companies, medium companies, and there is an American company that is now selling insurance for natural person. So people who have a big fortune, they have to administrate like black credit cards and diamond credit cards and limit credit cards. They buy this personal insurance for cyber attack to protect their families from moral damages, damages from image, and their value in the credit card. Mm-hmm. So I believe that in a short term, this number is going to increase, but what is in which price? So are we going to expect for more attacks, for more losses? With all this data we have here, as you said, we take like the average we take to discover that a guy is attacking us, it's 272 days a year. So after this time, you figure out that you've been attacked. So with all those losses, how much should we wait more? This is the question that the companies, they should raise. I believe one of the things that I believe is really important is that the directors, they should be more punished because of that. Because there is their obligation, the safety of the information is there's their obligation. They're not investing in this. And the CIOs are part of the board as well. Are you guys shocked? I mean,
Yeah. Since I am the executive director of this thing here, I'm kind of shocked. Yeah. Particularly about what you said.
I think that goes totally in the same way that you said. It is that in the week that we had the WannaCry breach, the answer, I had a lot of meetings. So many meetings. I call to many directors, many CIOs, and they every company that I called said yes. Okay, come here. I want to listen to you. I want to listen to what is happening, because cybersecurity companies are checking the dark web every day and knows before it explode that WannaCry would happen. But just when it happened, that they did something about it. But when I say did something, it's just to listen and not to really invest on it. So I think here, I don't know numbers in my mind, but I can check. But we assume that we respond, but we not prevent and predict. But we are ready to respond. Okay, we have technologies to search, technologies to know who did this inside my company. But when it's something like WannaCry, we don't know where it happens. We suppose that it's an email that is started, I don't know, on Russia or any place all over the world, but we really don't know where it comes. But even when it happens, it's difficult to face investments. We just be scared and we don't do nothing about it, just scared. And we invest on technologies, but I don't think it's enough. Education that you said, it's, I think, the key point of security. Education is the key point of culture that you said. If we don't have plans for education inside the companies, and not only inside the company, but in the schools also, because the millennials are going to somewhere to work one day. they will go to a position that I think it's CIOs maybe in some years, and education is the key point inside the schools and inside the companies, because they will go one day into that positions too.
Yeah. Any other? What this? Since you can go next, but this gentleman here.
My name is Geraldo Coin, and I was technical director at Microsoft Brazil, consulting director at Oracle, independent consultant now. And I want to stress one point which I'm glad you mentioned it, but it's not stressed enough, which is the main reason of all this bad situation. It's very simple. Bad quality of software and hardware. That's the point. You can make a software which is less vulnerable to attacks. Companies should make this. They don't. Because it costs a lot. It costs a company like the company for which I used to work will spend more to develop their products, will be late to the market, and customer will pay more. So there is absolutely no market incentive to do software which is very hard to be braked. I think that is the reason of that. I don't see a solution in a short period of time. So I'm very pessimistic. I think we will have more breaches, big ones, before really we will have perhaps some kind of regulation. Company have to make software which is good quality, which includes software which doesn't have bugs and crashes all the time, and opens it's completely open to attacks, which is the software you have today.
Just a little comment. Meanwhile, I was thinking that, for instance, in Europe, since governments are getting tougher on regulations concerning the protection of data stored by companies, maybe that will fit back into the industry. So putting pressure on the industry to make better quality software. It just occurred to me. Okay, of course.
Just say something. You know, it's interesting because I'm an auditor by background, so I'm skeptical about anything. And the older I get, the more I'm skeptical about new technology. So I am turning into with the dinosaurs that sit on boards right now. But I will say, I will say, in part to your point, I would think about in the early days when everyone was talking about cloud computing, I would think about cloud computing and thinking, oh my goodness, like why would you want your data up there? You don't know what's going on. But I was talking with one of our security experts within the firm, within PwC in the United States, and he made the point that would you rather have, 20 companies all doing their own ineffective and maybe inefficient trials at trying to protect their data, or would you rather have a really good cloud provider where they are, they've got this scale to really build in some of that privacy, and they can actually do a better job protecting data than 20 individual companies? That sort of changed the way I think, but I'm still hiding my money under my mattress. So.
I just wanted to make an observation in relation to what you said before. Is really the problem of alignment of interest. I think is even stronger in Brazil than in the rest of the even a bigger problem in Brazil than in the rest of the world, because one, for example, I don't think anyone got fired for problem of cybersecurity in Brazil, while, for example, for Target it was a bloodbath. Second is there's very few stock options in Brazil initially for tax reasons. So there's not necessarily an alignment as strong as in the US between share price and the CEOs. And also there were a law that should have been actually discussed in Parliament, but because of the impeachment, there's still nothing that has been approved efficiently. And last, the regulations. To give you a sense, the surveillance SOC. So if you remember the movie Minority Report with all the computers in a room, that's pretty much looking at the flow of data between servers, and that's the only way today to really have a chance not to be attacked. In 2 years, about 50% of the companies in France and the UK have adopted this system. That is actually very expensive. IBM has one solution here, and the reason why it was so rapidly adopted is because at least in the banks under IFRS, for example, can discuss with their auditors the provision in relation to the type of solutions they can put. So actually they can see the return immediately. They put less provision and they buy a more expensive system. And the same for insurance companies and the new rules of solvency. And this hasn't applied actually to Brazil for various different reasons, various different very powerful lobbies. Talking to people who actually do sometimes, we know quite well those people who do those attacks, the thing they say is the fact that Brazil is not well attacked at the moment because it's more difficult to monetize the data they get. But the moment they could actually monetize those data better, then it would be a great country to attack. So it seems that it's not, the data could be worse, and there's not necessarily a great alignment at the moment between the person buying the technology and the person actually suffering from it, which in effect is the client and not necessarily the CEO.
So, of course you can.
Thank you. I want to add something to Carlos is your name, right? So what Carlos said. So the importance of Gerald, sorry. The importance of the systems to be updated. We are migrating to a way without a way back, which is the fourth industrial revolution. We are going for this. Brazil is a little bit behind of some European countries like Germany, for example, but this is a trend in the world. It has to grow. The companies are going to be automatized with more artificial intelligence from now on, and I think. One of the biggest problems we have besides the data theft is the business interruption. This is a very concerning fact that we have. Most of the cases that we have in Brazil in terms of cyber attack, as per my as per my job, as per my routine, what we see more is the cyber extortion that come exactly for a charge for some money from the companies for them to avoid to have these business interruptions. So I'd like to hear from you. What is your perception about business interruption? I mean, in your researches, do you have your interviewers say to you something about it? They're concerned about business interruption, or do you think that is mainly about data loss?
And it's not, just to add one factor, it's not only business interruption, but also, let's say, the service provided by public infrastructures, right?
Yeah,
Which are
San
now
Francisco
managed,
one, right?
hospitals in the electric grid, in
My perception, based on no research, is that, and so really happy to hear from other people here, is that more of the focus is on data theft and not so much disruption of service per se, because I think the view is that doesn't happen as much as all of the theft of data that people hear and see about. But are there other perspectives?
I think people more involved with national security issues. I think I'm not an expert. You can here's what that guy. Just one comment, just for the sake of it. I presume people, especially in the U.S., who are concerned about national security issues, I think they must be dedicating time and energy to think through threatening threats to business interruption and to, because the two things are intertwined, and to public infrastructures, right?
To answer a question, before joining the session, I was talking with Catherine, and that was one of my comments. Before joining IBM, I worked for a big company in consulting, business strategy division, and we have a business case that approved it based on risk. Their systems were good, were fine, they worked properly, but they were old. So how to approve to change something old that was working properly? It's very hard to invest a lot of money in IT, hardware, software, whatever. But when you put the risk of not inputting voice out of the house, not receiving money, and put your business in risk, that's a way that you can approve change in your organization, because you cannot live with this kind of liability in a business. But it's very hard to quantify how much is that. And to justify investment, you have to put a business case in place. So sometimes it's not only money, it's also the part of personal data that you have to protect. So it's very hard to put a number in your social security, how much value is in the black market for your social security and things like that. So I guess it's something like this.
Around $100 per client.
Regarding this critical infrastructure, I'd like to know, I don't know if you have the data, but Obama administration released the cybersecurity framework in late 2013. Do you know how is the adoption of this? I love this framework. I think it's very complete in the US.
I don't know how widespread it's adopted. Was that, I mean, there's also the NIST framework. Is that the NIST framework? One of the things we were telling directors, and the NIST is the National Institute of Science and Technology, or something like that, NIST. One of the things that we were recommending to directors was to ask their management team, to board directors, to at least take a look at the NIST framework and report back to the board on where you are mostly aligned, where you're really out of alignment, and just at least to have a gap discussion on, is it really important that we close alignment in those areas? But quite honestly, I'm not entirely sure how much traction that has gotten.
can we close? All right. So, Catherine, once again, thank you so much. It's been a very interesting and interactive conversation, and I think we should ask the foundation not only to take care, but to come back to the subject, to make other discussions about the same topic, and I'm committed to that. So thank you, the PwC, for the partnership. Thank you again, Catherine. I hope we can see each other soon.
That'd be great.
Bye-bye.